I'm Luke Terry, I'm the QUT resident social entrepreneur, and I'm the CEO of an organisation called White Box Enterprises, which builds large-scale employment-focused social enterprises. I fell in love with social enterprises when I was a young kid and I left school and I went to my careers advisor and I said, I want to do something a bit social and a bit business. And they said, how about funeral directing? And late 90s, there wasn't units on social enterprise and all this sort of stuff. I left school, I studied business and marketing, I became an entrepreneur, bought and sold a lot of different businesses and set up my first social enterprise with my sister in the Glebe housing estate in Sydney, helping women get jobs in coffee and also get access to coffee for 50 cents a cup instead of a $3.50 a cup that was for sale on the Glebe High Street in Sydney. Went to London and just fell in love with this idea of social enterprise and went there for a job that was with Mind, a big mental health charity, to set up as many social enterprises as we could, funded by the European Union, that would employ people with a lived experience of mental illness. For me, the first social enterprises I came into contact with were Greyston Bakery, look it up, that was part of Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, Jamie Oliver's 15 restaurant. And I love this idea of a mission-locked business that's like entirely focused on doing social good. Any profit that's ever made, not that there is really any profit in employment, and I can talk about that in a bit, but any profit that is made is going back to the cause. Let's be clear, business has created a lot of the problems that we are in today. And there aren't many businesses, in Australia or the world that are focused on solving complex social problems. So we think that social enterprises can solve a lot of our problems, but we need you as students to take up the mantle and do it. In Australia right now, there's only 20 social enterprises. Look it up, whiteboxenterprises.com.au. We've listed all the social enterprises that employ more than 50 people that have difficulties getting into work, that pay a full, open, sustainable wage. There are social enterprises that are doing the training model, and I hear people talking about op shops and getting the skills to work. Nothing and when you talk to me, it's all about employment-focused social enterprises. But there's nothing that supports someone with a complex health issue like mental health, or something like people from an Indigenous background where it's twice the unemployment of the rest of the country, that helps with a paid job. Start with a job and build the programs around that, and you can change the world. So for me, Vanguard started out of that. Coming back to Australia in 2009, there were no social enterprise jobs, but we wanted to raise kids here. We got a job offer in Toowoomba to run a mental health charity that would help people get that first job. And so we thought, how can we do social enterprise with this? We went out to the community and we said, give us a contract in anything and we'll build a business around it, as opposed to this whole idea of, let's start a cafe, which I've done before and it doesn't always work out. If you're going to start a social enterprise cafe, folks, don't do it unless you've got a contract for 5,000 sandwiches. There's an example of that in LA. That's another story. So what we did was we first got a contract from a regional council in Toowoomba to run the boom gates, the 15 waste transfer stations that created jobs for 50 people overnight. Since it started in 2010, 2011, it's employed more than 200 people, helping them get their first job. It's funded by a $200,000 loan, to which we repay back, and a $30,000 grant, but it was all based around the opportunity. We then went out to the community and said, what else have you got? And they said, how about laundry? We're going to close our laundry in Toowoomba. We are going to send it all to Brisbane. If you can work out a way how to raise the $5 million, we'll give you an anchor contract for 8 tons of laundry, which wasn't enough. We needed 20 ton to get to a break-even point. If you can work with people that, as you say, are long-term unemployed and haven't worked in 5 years or more. So we did. So we raised the $5 million from 72 funding partners, which was incredible. Our sector isn't geared for this sort of stuff yet. We're getting there. And then we opened, and then we realized we didn't have enough equipment and linen to do the rest, so we had to raise another $3 million and almost went broke in the process, and that's another story. But yeah, that's the story of Vanguard and why we did it. Vanguard today has been open 2 years. It's employed 150 people. 30 of those people have gone on to mainstream employment. They start at 8 or 12 hours a week. They have have had an experience of chronic and enduring mental illness. We have 80-something staff on the payroll at any time. We open with 8 ton, which seems like a lot of laundry, but our plant can do a ton of laundry every hour. We're now washing 45,000 kilos, 45 tons of laundry every week. We're open 6 days a week. A quarter of our staff are under the age of 25 now. We've pivoted to a early intervention model. And we have a career centre that supports people with lived experience of mental illness get back to school and work, funded by the washing of dirty sheets, towels and pillowcases. It's important to know, sorry, long answer, but it's important to know that Vanguard is a DGR1 nonprofit social enterprise. It is completely mission locked. It has no owners. It has members like any good nonprofit. And each year those members decide on the board and if there's going to be any constitution changes. We need you as students to build businesses that are mission locked around creating a better world. That doesn't mean that you have to take crap pay for years and years and years. We pay our staff properly, all that sort of stuff. But for me, social enterprise is about a world that will make a better world. Social enterprises should always make a profit. But what you do with that profit, should it go to equity investors? Should it go to impact investors that want 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12% returns so they can buy a bigger boat? They always say that they won't. I believe in a world where we're putting back into the world. You know, the early settlers of our land would, you know, anything they took from the land would go back into the land. What if business was like that? You know, the purpose of the businesses that, you know, we've been involved in from a social enterprise level and at White Box around putting everything back in. Now, there is this thing that we like, you know, I like to talk about the term social impact ventures, you know, which is good businesses that are good business. Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, Body Shop are really good examples around that. But I encourage you to go and look up Ice Cream Social, which is a beautiful book about Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream was set up to be a for-profit, for-purpose social enterprise as such. They're the only ones that have pulled it off. And the only way they did it was when they sold to Unilever, and they had no choice in the end, and read the book Ice Cream Social, I'll tell you all about it. But the only way that they were able to do it was that they had an independent board that monitored Unilever's behaviours and would sue Unilever at their expense. If you go down this path, realise it's tricky. If you've got a mission-locked constitutional thing saying that your business can only do this, and then people will get behind you. You know, look at examples like Thank You Water and all the other stuff. You know, other examples of the 50-50 thing are like Who Gives a Crap toilet paper, where it's very clear. But let's not social clad it. Let's not black clad it. Let's just be businesses that are here to solve complex social problems. I now, after many years, earn a decent income. I do okay. You know, and it doesn't mean that you have to be poor. And I think just examine the reasons why you're doing that. But I think we need to have a true conversation about this for-profit, for-purpose piece. You know, when I hear that Uber is a social enterprise or Panadol is a social enterprise, you know, these are businesses that do good things, but that's my view on it. I think people make decisions for their own reasons. When Vanguard opened, you know, we had one anchor customer, which was incredible. St Vincent's Health Australia gave us a contract for 9 years. The normal linen contract in Australia is only 2 years, but they gave us an anchor contract for 9 years. And we hadn't washed any laundry before. I hadn't really washed any laundry before. Like, it was a joke to a lot of people. And we went out to a whole bunch of other customers, you know, all 150 of them in the region. And we said, will you give us a go? And they're like, you haven't opened yet. You haven't proved. It took 6 months of hard slog to build up market trust. 9.5 times out of 10, when we go talk to a customer, they're like, let's be clear, Luke, like, we want to help you and we want our spend to make a difference, but it's got to be about the product and service first. If we can then tell that narrative to our customers that we're doing this, I mean, we're talking to Corporate Travel Australia around how they can identify hotels that are using Vanguard Laundry and hotel housekeeping, and which is another social enterprise we're setting up, and then they can steer the customers to that. I think at a general consumer level, it makes a difference, and the brands want to be able to do that. I mean, why do a lot of brands have big foundations? They have big foundations because it looks better to put on the front of their packet or on their media ad and that sort of stuff. Community connection makes a big difference, and I think our generation are really seeing that. So, but it's always got to be product and quality and service first. In Vanguard Laundry, we stopped all the Brisbane providers coming up the hill and going into Toowoomba. Doesn't exist anymore. A little bit into Woolworths and national contract stuff, but we're working on a subcontracting arrangement with them. It takes time to build market trust, but those people didn't come across, you know, we built that on customer service and quality. The two biggest challenges for Vanguard Laundry are, and it took me a little while to work this out, and I'm talking from an employment-focused context. when you hire someone at the bottom of the employment ladder, and let's not talk Down syndrome or any profound disability level, let's just talk mental health, refugee asylum seekers, Indigenous people, ex-offenders. It's normally a confidence level because those guys and girls haven't really had a job. And the efficiency level there is normally about a 25% efficiency gap. Australia has the highest award wages in the world, fact. And when you're looking at paying people, the equivalent of $20 an hour with a, $19.60 at the moment, the minimum wages, with a 25% loading. And I'm not saying we should or shouldn't pay that, but when you go to a normal traditional business person, it's a struggle. So we have a 25% efficiency gap. We can measure that against other laundries in our cohort staff. So it's a big challenge around how we find those efficiencies and how we budget for that. So when you're building a social enterprise, be really careful because impact investors and others will come in and say, I'll teach you how to make a profit. And the best way to make a profit on it is not to hire people at the bottom of the employment ladder. When I've visited some social enterprises in the world and seen that they hire 10% or 5% of people. At Vanguard, we hire 70% of people from our cohort group. But it's really important that you don't do 100% because you don't want an illness-saturated environment. You want to make sure there's the most important and powerful thing about someone getting a job in an environment is being invited home for Christmas lunch or going out to a barbecue on the weekend and having community connections outside of a mental health nurse or a counsellor. That's challenge number one, is hiring. But that's why we do what we do, because businesses aren't hiring those people. The second big challenge is leadership. It's all the people watching this right now. It's this issue of having leadership that's not too far to the left in terms of social support and not too far to the right. Over the years, we've had all sorts of leaders work in our social enterprises. We've had people that have come in and said, right, we're here to make a profit. And then we've had people come in and say, right, we're here to run stronger community programs and we're going to put the profit to the side. You need to be able to navigate both. And it's really tricky. And I think in Australia at the moment in our sector, we don't have both yet. When our enterprises are getting big, we're having to pull in people from overseas that have experience in working in both. You need to be able to manage a board that has experienced corporate knowledge, but you also need to be able to, work with someone that may have nowhere to sleep tonight. And, what are your relationships with the community sector to be able to make that work? And are you going to go and build yourself a housing program, or are you going to work with another provider, and how are you going to work out what those gaps are? What's your theory of change and how does that look? A normal commercial manager hasn't even heard the words theory of change. So how do we balance those is a huge challenge for our sector, and how we build the leaders of tomorrow for this world we want to create. We have so many complex social problems. Australia's a little bit ahead of a lot of the world. We can do this, but we need leaders like yourselves to make this happen. The problem for Vanguard is that because we had so many different funding partners, everyone had a different example, and it came down to there were probably 15 critical funding partners. We had support from Paul Ramsay Foundation, we had support from Ian Potter Foundation, English Foundation, a lot of Westpac Bank, National Australia Bank were involved. There's a whole bunch of different partners, and each of those have independent thoughts on what impact meant. The first thing that comes up in all of this is a thing called social return on investment, SROI, and then you get surrounded by a whole lot of people that know a whole lot of people that say, hey, we can come and do a valuation for you. And then, you end up talking to lots of different universities and research people that want to do, different things. And what the biggest problem is that it's the faculty that you start working with. So for me, I started talking to a particular faculty at a particular local university, and we couldn't go cross-faculty. And for me, the complex problems that we have is for all our communities solved. So you need health economists, you need business people, you need psychologists, you need social studies, and it needs to be a multi-pronged approach, which is really like a wake up of our research system. I remember sitting down with an incredible Simon Freeman, who's on the board of White Box Enterprises and was the CEO of Paul Ramsay Foundation, with another incredible two staff members, Joe Taylor and Charlotte Siddle at Paul Ramsay Foundation, and them saying, look, I'm being pushed down 4 different research impact measurement models. SROI was the top of that. SROI costs a fortune. It's a fly in, fly out model. You do get a number at the end. And I remember Simon saying to me, Simon won't like me quoting him, but he was saying, this isn't what government wants. We're not doing longitudinal studies anymore. So I remember sitting down with my wife after that meeting and watching the Dunedin, you all know about the Dunedin study. If you don't, look it up, where they follow, a bunch of, 100 plus people from birth all the way through their life. And I remember my wife going, you should do that. And I'm like, let's do that to employment. And in Australia, there hasn't been any studies about what happens to someone 26 weeks after employment, especially around mental health. There's been some housing studies and that sort of stuff. So what we did was, I got a list together on a piece of paper and I went and saw a couple of different researchers across the country who were leading in this space. And I said, all right, so what impact does getting a job make for this group around justice? What impact does it make on stays at local mental health ward? I just made a love list of things that I wanted to know that we don't know. We don't actually know what happens when someone transitions to another job. We don't know if that's a good approach. We don't know if that's a bad approach. All we know is that we could maybe get them off Centrelink. But I have a hypothesis that I see the change in someone's life at a mental health centre when someone gets a job. But when I go and present to a government department, they say, you have no evidence. Show us and they're not willing to fund the evidence. And so it's just this merry-go-round of show us the evidence, but we haven't funded any. And so what do we do? So we started with this list of 10 questions, and then we worked with our research team to get a theory of change together, which was based around 4 things. People, the outcome. Place, what difference will it have in the community that we work, being Toowoomba. Policy, and profit. What happens to the profit? Is there profit? How does that look? So making sure that we're having a full analysis of the financials of Vanguard and its problems it's having. So people, place, policy, profits is our triple or quadruple P program. If you're trading your business off the back of social good, you have you might get grants, you might get some favors like some pro bono legal advice, or you have a real responsibility to be able to measure that and show your partners and supporters that got you up and running that you are getting the impact that they put on the line to make that happen. And I think now that we're going into this line of for-profit, for-purpose ventures, I meet people all the time that go, well, I'm not paying for that evaluation. And I'm like, you're trading off the back of social good. You're trading off Bob and Sally going down and buying the juice because they think it's going to be doing good. We have a responsibility. It doesn't have to be the level of study that we do at Vanguard. We did the Vanguard study to that scale because we don't have enough studies. But, what's the difference that you're making? And you're all in a university environment. How can you get that independently verified with some sort of stamp from somewhere? Honest students are always looking for projects. Let's show that we can solve the world's problems. The first tip is dive in and don't think about it too much. Get a bit of advice, but don't get too much of advice, depending on what your sector is. I don't know if I would build laundries now that I know as much as I do about laundries. I didn't know when I set up a laundry. We did a model, we got some people around it, and it actually showed that the margins were like 15 to 20%. The margins in laundry are 7 to 8%, and I only found that out like 6 months ago when we had the right professional which showed me a whole bunch of case data. That's really hard to do when you're hiring people at the bottom of the employment ladder. So dive in and give it a go. Get the right people around, but this stuff hasn't been done before and there's naysayers everywhere. We have complex problems that we need to solve. The second tip is think big. Set up a hairdresser for 2 or 3 staff if that's important to you and that's the way of making a change. But there are 800,000 Australians out there right now looking for work and actively, voluntarily registered with Disability Employment Services that want to make a go of things. We have an obligation to build those right opportunities, and we're not going to do it 2 or 3 jobs at a time. We could, but for me, it's like, let's think big. The third tip is, if you're going to do something that's market driven, it's really, really hard, but if you can try and get a contract in anything and build a business around it, that's been something that we've worked with recently. So find a contract opportunity and someone says, if you can build this, we'll buy X muesli bars from you. There's one of my favorite social enterprises called LA Kitchen in Los Angeles. They set up a kitchen around a contract opportunity to make all the sandwiches for LA Airport. So how can you get, Juma Ventures does all the condiments and they hire disadvantaged youth to be able to sell all the hot dogs and popcorn. It was based off the contract. If you can start with the contract, you can leapfrog hugely. So we're working with Accor at the moment to build a social enterprise around hotel housekeeping services. And we leapfrogged the whole problem of building how to work it out and, actually make beds and all policies and process around labour hire by working with a QUT alumni, a student who built Australia's biggest privately owned labour hire company off $800, who provided us with everything off the shared drive to get started and just leapfrogging, and then a member of staff who's a QUT alumni as well to be able to just jump straight into that. So get a contract in anything and find how you can leapfrog the idea. They're my tips. But just be persistent as well. And don't sell out to impact investors.